Hey, my name's Tony Gilbertson. I'm with Phelps Game Calls, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about elk calling and locating elk and some common mistakes that people make. And so I've been calling elk for, probably 15, 18 years now. For the most part, self-taught. I learned a lot from DVDs back in the day before there was YouTube. And so it was just a matter of listening to elk in the woods while I was hunting, and listening to a variety of elk that were recorded on video back in the day. And then, of course, when YouTube did come around, listening to people like the big names in the industry like Corey Jacobson and Dirk Durham, who I competed against years ago, Jason Phelps, of course. So I learned a lot from them just in terms of technique, but really when it came to kind of honing my skill, so to speak, it really switched from that to listening to elk and trying to emulate or mimic the sounds that they make. So anyway, I started competing in the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's World Elk Calling Contest back in, I think it was 2005 or so. And that's really when I started calling. And then I did that for, 4 years or something. Best I could place was fourth. And I got out of it for a while. I was young. I didn't have a lot of resources to travel. And then I got a wild hair and decided to jump back in again. And in 2021, I started competing. I entered the men's division. I won the men's division. And then not too long after that, Phelps Game Calls contacted me and wanted to know if I wanted to be a part of their pro team. And I couldn't turn that down. That was an opportunity for me that was something that I had been looking forward to for a long time. I didn't really think it would ever happen. So I was happy to accept that offer. And in 2022, I competed in the pro division and took second place. Last year, I was knocked out in the first round, but this year I went in kind of with a different attitude and a lot more practice and a mission in mind, and that was to try to win. Didn't know if I could, considering the talent that I was going up against and the competition, but I came out successful. So won the professional division this year, and I can't be happier. So with that, thought I'd talk a little bit about just locating elk in general. So the season is upon us. We're talking here in 2 days. And so for me, I like to get out in the woods as early as I can. I know some guys will wait till later in the day. They don't want to deal with the rush of people at first thing in the morning. And a lot of time, the bulls and the cows are headed to their bedding areas early in the morning. It's hard to turn them around to come into calls. So they'll wait until the afternoon to go out there and really start calling. But I like to get out there early, at least locate them and try to figure out where they're going so you can find those bedding areas. So I usually start with cow sounds because to me it's the least intimidating sound that you can make in the woods. And it's an easy call, I think, to learn. And compared to bugling, I think even if you didn't know how to bugle, you could go out with a diaphragm call or an external reed call like this and just make some cow sounds and just listen. So usually I go out and I'll start out with either an external reed call or a diaphragm call, and I'll just make some simple cow sounds. I might make sounds like that 2 or 3 times, and then I listen. And it's important to listen for a while because most of the time, bulls aren't going to respond immediately, especially to cow sounds. So I sit there and listen. If I don't hear anything, sometimes it's just a matter of changing up the sound, the cow sound itself. So I'll use a diaphragm call. Sometimes I'll use my tube to amplify the sound. And then I just sit there and wait in the dark and listen. And if I don't get a response from that, then I'll throw out a locate bugle, and that sounds a little bit something like this. So I usually start at the high range in a bugle, that high pitch ringing sound, because that's what's going to carry through the woods. And I hunt the coast range mainly, so that high pitched sound will carry much better than the lower registers or lower tones in a bugle. So again, I'll locate bugle and I'll sit there and listen. If I don't get a response, then I'll just keep going, and I'll go a few hundred yards, and I'll go through that same scenario all over again, because the brush is so thick on the coast range that the sound doesn't travel that far, and you've got all these little kind of ravines and gullies and canyons that elk can hide in or feed in or travel through, and they may not hear you 200 or 300 yards back up the trail or road system that you're on. So anyway, I go through that scenario again. Now, if I hear a bull bugle, then what I do is cover as much ground as I can between where I was standing when I made the call and where that bull's at. And hopefully between the time that I get from where I bugled or cow called, he's continuing to make sounds so I can move in on him without being detected. So if he's not making sounds, then, like I said, I go a little ways. I'll throw out some more cow sounds or bugles or something just to kind of relocate him and see where he's at. Most of the time, that early in the morning, they're on a mission. They're traveling to their bedding area. They've been up feeding all night. And so I'll try to follow them and find out where their bedding areas are and move in on them. As I move in on them and I get closer, then again, I'm gonna focus on cow sounds. I know there's some guys out there that would argue that maybe bull sounds are better, but early in the season, I think when bulls are out there trying to gather up cows, I think cow sounds, in my opinion, are more effective. So when I move in and I start making cow sounds, I'm not afraid to make some noise, because elk make plenty of noise when they're walking through the brush. So I'm just making some sounds to sound like elk, breaking branches, tripping over logs and rocks because it's dark, but sounding like elk, breaking branches, running through the brush and just making elk sounds. And so cow sounds, same kind of deal. Just get up in there and maybe slip some calf sounds in there too, just to sound like more than one elk. So this is kind of what it sounds like. And you might notice I've got my hand up here next to my mouth. And that's really to be able to turn and kind of direct that sound to different areas. And as I'm walking through the brush, I'm making those sounds. I'm not necessarily standing in one spot. And I'm turning my head, because elk, when they're traveling through the woods, unless they're on a defined trail and it's not real thick, then they're kind of traveling with each other. They're feeding through the timber and that. So I try to sound as much like a herd of elk as I can, going through the brush, and hopefully that bull will pipe off again and let me know where he's at as I get closer. If he's responding to cow sounds, that's all I do. I won't throw a bugle in there. There's no reason to. Now, if I'm moving in and I've lost track of the bull and he is not bugling, then I'm going to throw out another locate bugle. And then I listen. If he responds to that, then I'm going to bugle some more. And then I'm going to listen to him, and the way he responds to me it's going to dictate how I respond. I have a tendency to kind of mimic what the bull is doing until they stop bugling, and then I might get it more aggressive. But if the bull bugles, doesn't chuckle or grunt, I'm just going to bugle. If he just chuckles or just grunts, then I'm going to chuckle or just grunt. If he goes through a full bugle and grunts and chuckles, then I'm going to do the same thing. So let's say we get a bull and he bugles, and I go through and do the same thing, and he's chuckling. So I'll throw a chuckle or a grunt in on the end of my bugle here, just to give you a sense of what that sounds like. So again, that, in my experience, when you try to mimic those bulls, it really frustrates them. It's like that kid on the playground that copies everything you say. You know, you get kind of mad and angry about it. And I found that bulls will do the same thing. And sometimes the bull's just not going to respond to you. You can cow call, you can bugle. He'll pipe off when you locate him, and you get in closer to him, and you know, he decides that today's not the day he wants to fight, or he's not really interested in the cows, and he just moves off, and you never hear him again. You know, I get asked a lot of questions about how to make elk sounds in general, and I always try to steer people towards making cow sounds first, because it's easier to learn how to make cow sounds than it is bull sounds. So just, I guess, to start with the basic anatomy, if so to speak, I guess, of a diaphragm elk call, you've got, so this is my own signature call. This is the Gilbertson diaphragm that was developed with myself and Phelps Game Calls. It's built to my style of calling, and I think that is really important for people to understand. You have to find a diaphragm that fits not only your palate, kind of the structure of your mouth, but also your style of calling. I have a tendency to blow fairly hard. I use a lot of air pressure and volume when I'm bugling, especially because I want to reach out there and really get a lot of volume to carry through the timber. And then when I'm bugling, if I'm going to challenge a bull and he's wanting to fight, I don't want a call that I have to worry about trying to finesse. I want something that I can throw in my mouth, use as much air pressure and volume. I really want to I want to punch that bull in the face. I want to get him to fight. I want him mad. So that's my style of calling. When somebody's first starting out, so for example, Phelps has got a beginner series. They've got a black amp, a green amp, and a gray amp. And the black one has got the lightest latex with a lighter stretch. It's the easiest ones to use, the easiest diaphragm out of that pack to use. And that's what I recommend somebody start with, is either their, again, for Phelps, their orange diaphragm or black. But regardless of the manufacturer, you want to find something that's got a light latex, a lighter stretch, something that doesn't take a lot of air pressure or volume to use at first, until you become more proficient at making sounds with that call. When you start using more air pressure and volume, then you're probably going to have to move up to something that's got a little bit thicker latex, a little tighter stretch. And until you kind of get used to your style of calling, it's going to take an investment. You have to go out and purchase a few different calls to figure out what suits your style of calling. But back to the diaphragm. So inside, so it's got this tape on the outer edge here, and inside or beneath that layer of tape, you've got a metal frame, and that frame kind of looks like a clamshell, initially, and then they take a piece of latex and they stretch it between the metal frame, and then they crimp it down, depending on the stretch that they want. Based on the call that they're manufacturing, they crimp it down, and they might put a little bit of back tension in the diaphragm. I prefer more back tension than what most people do, but anyway. So, and then they put it in a a device that trims the tape so it's kind of this horseshoe shape. So when you're first starting to learn how to use a diaphragm, you want to put this in your mouth with the dome facing up and this arch on the back side of the tape towards the back of your mouth. And you put it in the roof of your mouth and find a spot that is comfortable at first, and then you want to try to make a sound with it. And if you put it in that spot and you can make a sound, then I recommend keeping it there until you, I guess, determine if that is, if you're making realistic cow sounds and realistic bull sounds. If that's not the right spot and your elk sounds aren't sounding quite right, then you're going to want to move it around, and they're either forwards or backwards, and just try to find that sweet spot that fits your style of calling. I know a lot of people that use a diaphragm that have it way towards the front of their mouth to where the tape is touching the front teeth. Myself, I've got this back to where the back part of the tape is touching my soft palate. It's hard for a lot of people if they've got a really bad gag reflex, but that's where it works best for me. So once you get that spot on the roof of your mouth figured out where you want that diaphragm, then you'll take the tip of your tongue and place it kind of right down below your front teeth on the bottom, and you arch your tongue. And you want that diaphragm in a location where you're using the strongest part of your tongue, and you arch your tongue and you place pressure against that latex. And once you've got that figured out, then you just start to force air across that latex. You're not blowing, you're using your diaphragm to push air through the opening is going to be created from the air pressure that you're forcing between your tongue and that latex. And then you just try to make sounds with it. Once you make a sound, then you can kind of try to, I guess, get used to where the placement is and how you made that sound. And remember that cow sounds start high and end up low. So you're using more tongue pressure initially to get that high pitched sound out of a cow sound, and then you're relaxing your jaw and your tongue and dropping your tongue off of that latex and blowing less air to get that lower register in that note. So sounds like this. So you can kind of see a little bit that my mouth kind of opens up a little bit. A lot of people make the mistake of using their lips to try to make the sounds, to kind of change the tone. When you watch a cow elk mew or make cow sounds, their mouth is open. They're not moving their lips. Some people will put the diaphragm in their mouth and they'll make a sound like this. It doesn't sound realistic at all. So keep your mouth open. Again, loosen the tongue pressure off that diaphragm, drop your jaw just slightly, and that's where you'll get that lower tone. And again, the high tone, you're going to use more air pressure because you've got more tongue pressure against that latex. It's going to take more air to force air between your tongue and that latex to get that high-pitched sound. And then when you drop your jaw and loosen your tongue pressure off of that latex, it doesn't take near as much air pressure to get that lower sound. For bugles, it's the exact opposite. You start at the low end and go to the high end. So you're starting with low tongue pressure and ending up with high pressure to get those high pitches out of that bugle. So it sounds like this. And you put a little bit of voice inflection into that to get kind of the growly sound initially. But you can be versatile in your cow sounds and your bugles once you become proficient at calling. You don't have to start down at the low end. You can start at the high end. Chuckling and grunting is one of the hardest things to learn, but it really is kind of a cow sound, so to speak, with a lot of air pressure. and then you you inhale in between each chuckle or grunt. So in theory, if you're doing it right, you should be able to chuckle and grunt for a really long period of time. One of the mistakes a lot of people make is they take one big deep breath and they just go, I don't know if I can even do it, but I'll try it. So you one big deep breath, and then they just, once they run out of air, they're done. But to do it correctly, you want to inhale in between each chuckle or grunt. So the difference between grunts and chuckles, grunts are typically louder, drawn out more. The cadence different. It's not as rapid as chuckling. So that was an example of grunts. This is what chuckles sound like. So again, the cadence is really one of the big indicators or differences between chuckling and grunting. You know, a lot of people think that they need to learn how to chuckle and grunt. And I'm here to tell you that if you can go out and you can get a good locate bugle out, sometimes that's all it takes. I think the more advanced you become in your calling techniques, the more variety you can throw into your calls and the sounds that you make, I think the better off you're going to be. But becoming proficient at cow calls and at least a locate bugle, I think is going to increase your odds in the woods of encounters. So I think that's an important takeaway. One other sound that actually a couple. You know, when you get into a situation where you're in close to a bull and you want to challenge that bull, sometimes they'll do this kind of a raspy bugle that we oftentimes refer to as a lip ball. And I don't use it that much in the woods. In fact, really the only time I'll do it is if a bull's doing it or if nothing else is working. So a lip ball sounds kind of like this. So a lot of times they'll rip off that lip ball, that real guttural, raspy sound, and they'll throw some chuckles on the end of it because they're mad at that point. So, and then, you know, a lot of guys, I've heard this too, you know, they get in close to a bull and he hangs up out there and he barks at you. When a cow barks at you, game's over. They've either seen you or smelled you, and they've put the entire herd on alert, and it won't be long before that entire herd buggers out. So if a cow does that, game over. You might as well just sit down and have a snack and wait for that herd to calm down, or go find some different elk. But when a bull does it, if you've had an encounter with that bull and you're exchanging bugles back and forth or cow sounds, and he's bugling at you, if he hangs up out there a ways out of bow range, sometimes he'll bark at you. Sometimes he'll bark and bugle. Sometimes he'll bark and grunt, bark and chuckle. He's looking for you. He's telling you that he wants to see you, show yourself. And if you don't, then he's going to lose interest and he's going to leave because he might think something's up. So a bark, I'll give an example of a bark bugle, bark grunt, just to kind of give you an idea of what you might hear in that situation. Sometimes they just grunt. Or sometimes they just bark. But if you hear that sound and you've had that encounter and that exchange with that bull and he's doing that, he's wanting to see something. If he doesn't see something quick, then he's probably going to leave. That's where a decoy can come in handy sometimes. I don't use decoy that often, but if there is something that at least looks like an elk that might cause him to come in a little further, that's a little tip that might work for some people. So that's all I had for today. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck this year in the woods. If you're interested in the new All-American series with my signature call on it, or any other Phelps diaphragm, you can pick them up at G4 Archery or PhelpsGameCalls.com. And until next time, good luck.